Sheriff. All rise. Oh yes, this County Commission of Sumner County is now open pursuant to adjournment. God bless this country and this honorable commission. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Scott Langford is going to offer our invocation for the evening.
It is with great sadness that we begin our meeting tonight. We just found out that 2 teenagers from Portland have been killed in a car accident, and 2 others are in transit to Vanderbilt. So we want to remember them, and we want to remember their families at this time as well. Let's bow our heads. Gracious Lord, we come before you tonight with heavy hearts, and we lift up for just a moment these families. And words cannot contain or capture the grief that they feel. But we pray that your presence and your embrace will surround them and envelop them, and that they will feel your presence and our prayers and our compassion and love. And we pray for the 2 that are on their way to Vanderbilt. We pray that you will bless them and keep them, heal and restore them, and that you will guide the doctors and nurses' hands that take care of them, the paramedics' hands, that they're beyond just their own strength and abilities, that you will guide their hands. We pray tonight, O Lord, as we gather here to take up tough deliberations and to think about the future of our county, that you will give us wisdom and courage and guidance and strength. We also pray tonight for humility, O Lord, that we can set aside anything that would keep us from doing what is best for our county. We thank you for the way that you have blessed us and blessed Sumner County. And we pray again, Lord, that you will lift us up. And we pray again for these families in Portland. It's in your precious and holy name we pray. Amen.
Mr. Clerk, will you lead us in Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Clerk, would you call the roll?
Roll call is now open. Each commissioner, please record your vote, your presence. We have 22 members. That's correct. 22 members present, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I know that Mr. Popswell is out of town, was not going to be here this evening, and Ms. Kruger is currently with her child at Vanderbilt Hospital, so we need to keep her in our prayers also. Mr. Clerk, will you read the special call agenda, please?
Yes, sir. Special notice called meeting of the Sumner County Board of County Commissioners is called for Monday, November 3rd, 2014, 7 p.m. at the Sumner County Administration Building, County Commission Chambers. The purpose of the special called meeting is to discuss, consider, and possibly vote on the following. 1, adoption of the 2014 tax rate, and 2, funding of the Airport Authority grant match up to $182,000. The County Executive Holt and Paul Decker, Chairman of the County Commission, have called this special meeting. Anyone having any interest desiring to comment or ask questions concerning the above referenced topic is invited to attend the meeting.
Thanks, sir. And at this time, we do the recognition of the public. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to speak on what is on the agenda, there are 2 items on the agenda tonight. If there's anyone here that would like to speak to that, please come forward and sign up.
Anyone wish to sign up?
Okay, I see no names. To sign up, so I will call the recognition of public to a close. Next is the adoption of the 2014 tax rate, and that report will come from our Budget Committee chairperson, Mr. Paul Good. Mr. Good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to members of the body. We're going to have a presentation I think most were probably already in the room when we had our budget finance director, make a presentation based on the due diligence that we have had to go through to get to where we are tonight. I want to start out by a few comments. If you were in budget, I apologize, you got to hear it twice, roughly the same thing. Of kind of a semi-quick history, how we got to where we are tonight, and why it is critical that we deal with this matter tonight. You know, we were, as elected folks, we have to make tough decisions sometimes. And as my dad used to say 100 years ago, being in politics sometimes like being a high school football or basketball referee. No matter what decisions you might make some people mad, but you got to do it. I want to do a brief history on why we got to where we are to where tonight, and to recap a few things and many misnomers, and because there's lots of information out, combination, some newspapers and other sources that are just completely inaccurate. I know the executive may want to speak to that, and then we will, as quick as we can, get into Mr. Long's presentation. One of the situations and why this is so pressing that we actually have to do something tonight, and Ms. Nelson is here, and she can answer any questions if anyone has any questions, and that is our tax. She has to get our tax cards. You can imagine she is inundated right now with people that are calling her office, emailing her, and actually showing up in person, begging that they want to try to pay their taxes. As you know, many of you, along with title companies and mortgage companies, want to pay them by December 31st. And to do that, we normally would have already had those out by about October 1, but to do that, even if we pass tax rate tonight and she has the authority to go forward, it'd still take another 2 to 3 weeks for her to get that processed. Is that a fair statement, Ms. Nelson? And so for those reasons, it is extremely critical. We were put in this rock and hard place. I want to remind everyone, mainly, and the executive may speak to this more, by obviously our assessor's office. The tax rate, which we're going to talk about this in great detail here in a minute, but I will remind you that a lot of people were under the assumption that Sumner County is probably going up in value, and we were led to believe that we were a growing community and going up in value. When the assessor office let all of our individuals, the finance director, the county executive, the director of schools, and many others know that we were anticipating an uptick as well, and then it came in way below what was projected. I'll remind everyone that a supermajority of this body, the chairman, the county executive, the director of schools, most mayors, I think almost every mayor in this town, all 100% agreed that there seemed to be a problem. In that transpired, as just an added reminder, that some of us had a meeting that we set up with the Comptroller of Tennessee's office, our only avenue to do anything at this juncture. We had that meeting, which turned into 2 meetings, and they agreed that we should have a hearing, which includes the Comptroller by statute, the Comptroller, the Treasurer, the Secretary of State, the Governor's Council, lawyer, and 2 assessors. In those meetings, they agreed unequivocally that bad practices were done. Mr. Long will speak to the issue that actually we have all the facts and data in the world to say it actually started back in 2009. And I'm going to just wait and let you come back to that, Mr. Long, in your presentation, and if you could make sure and point that out on why we, since that first mistake, feel like we're losing well over $1 million a year in that situation. After those hearings, part of what they were mesmerized about, as a reminder, that there were 25,000 parcels out of 72,000, roughly 35%, that were arbitrarily devalued with no basically facts, figures, or rumors, or why, and so forth and so on. Those questions are still unanswered, but we have now been, because of that, put in this situation to where not only do we have this tax issue with the issues with Ms. Nelson's office, it is our revenue, I might add you, and on top of that, we jeopardize BEP funding to the tune of millions that we have to deal with. I want to point out that for the whole committee, and my appreciation to Mr. Long and his office, staff, Mr. Chris Taylor, our Vice Chairman, the County Executive Director Phillips, and a few others, we have spent countless hours to get us where we are tonight. And of course, most of this is stuff that's been going on for quite some time and is not new information. So real quick, I wanted to point out a couple of things that have been, and I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to maybe talk about this, on why not only do we have the situation with the assessor's office and how we got to where we are, but the rosy picture of how we got to where we are is not that rosy in the grand scheme of things. First off, we've not had a tax increase for about 11 years. When we did that tax increase, it was the largest tax increase in history. We had roughly 47 cents. In that tax increase, the proposal you're going to see tonight, that will actually be less of a percentage of what was done at that juncture 10 years ago. I've learned by my due diligence in history that we did nothing leading up to that 10 years ago, and then we had to have such an infusion to take care of our needs. But we also did at that time some new capital programs, which have created Portland, the two Portland schools, Station Camp, E.B. Williams, and a few others. The other misnomer that has been out there is about the tax increase situation as it relates to the low income and elderly. I'll remind everybody, especially new and in the audience, that we passed a tax increase that was done by a private act originally, the legislature, a few years ago, that keeps anyone that is qualified, that is 65 years or older and makes in that 30, Ms. Nelson, 35 to 36,000, that their taxes are froze and won't change whatsoever. Let's see, at this time, I think what we're going to do is we're going to have an opportunity to hear from Mr. Long. Mr. Long, if you can get ready. And I do want to point out one other thing, actually, real quick, that Mr. Long pointed out to give to me. We've talked about in the past how we have never had a tax increase and we've never done, we've not paid our way, if you will. We're going to see some liabilities and some promises that we made, like we promised a judge that we only funded for half a year, SRO officers that we don't have the money for, and many other things. I've got a brief history here, just that goes back to only 2010, that shows when it was of the appearance, and maybe even in some newspaper articles, that we were this wonderful conservative commission and not, and never raising new revenues and paying our bills. In 2010, and we'll go through a couple of them real quick, just as an FYI. In 2010, we borrowed basically from our fund balance 3.2 plus million to be able to make it. 2011, 3.4 plus million. 2012, 2.87 million. 2013, 2.8 plus million. 2014, 5 plus million. And 2015, 4.8 plus $1 million. Most would make the argument that you cannot continue to take everything from our savings and to just exist. I'll let Mr. Long go and say what you'll see is a presentation with a recommendation here. We are the lowest taxed county in all of Middle Tennessee at this juncture, and after this proposal, we will still be the lowest property tax county with exception of Williamson, which of course is apples and oranges. With that, I'd ask Mr. Long to start his presentation, and we can certainly ask questions as we go.
Yes, I was asked by the budget chairman to look at our current financial situation, specifically to look the necessary resources to cover the capital outlay needs and to continue our services at the current rate. To kind of do this endeavor, I've actually broken it into 3 major categories, which I'll call considerations. The first consideration is your capital improvements programs funding, and the second is continuation of major initiatives. For these 2 particular considerations, I want to show you where you've been, where you're at, and where you're going. And the last one is just the major challenges that you're going to be facing in the near-term future. Capital improvements programs, the history, or where you've been with your capital improvement program. For the past 10 years, you've spent in excess of $191 million on debt finance capital projects. 2010, you issued approximately $6.5 million of additional debt for projects. 2013, $30 million. Prior to 2012, all your smaller capital projects were actually financed from your operating funds. The relevance of this will be made apparent on the next slide of where you're currently at. Your current state, you have $5 million available annually in your capital projects fund. This covers reoccurring small capital items. These particular items right here were covered in the past through the operating funds, but because of inflation and lack of resources have been moved to this capital fund. Currently, you have zero capacity in your debt service fund. What that means is revenues equals expenditures. Without huge growth, you have no capacity to issue any additional debt for large capital constructions or renovations. Currently, you have only $5 million left in your capital projects fund. Identified capital needs. As most of you have seen in the recent presentation, there's $70.5 million of school constructions and renovations that are currently needed. $20 million for economic development. Forest Retreat Interchange Industrial Expansion, $4.9 million match. Exposition Center, $1 million. And airport grants of $1 million, which all are in excess of $95 million. Now we look at our major initiatives. As many of you know, if not all, one of our major initiatives is to have a school resource officer in every school. In 2014, salaries and benefits were just slightly over $318,000. In 2015 budget, they were in excess of $1.6 million and a $1.3 million increase. For 2020, to finish out these initiatives, you'll need to double that or in excess of 1.6 more additional dollars based on today's rates, just for salaries and benefits. Then we'll look at libraries. In recent times, you've constructed a new Hendersonville and Gallatin library. You've expanded Portland, Westmoreland, and renovated them, and currently are in the process of opening a new library in Millersville. In 2004, $660-some thousand. 2015, in excess of $1.3 million with the partial year for Millersville Library. Basing Millersville Library on Westmoreland, our next comparable library, it'll take at least $131,000 additional dollars in 2016 to get this library up and operational annually. Other initiatives. New General Sessions Judge, 2014 budget, $0. 2015, an additional $215,000. Based on our most recent numbers, which they've changed a little bit since the original anticipation, we're looking at $450 to $550 additional annual operational cost for the new General Sessions Judge. School initiatives. From 2004 to 2009, 5 new schools were opened. Talking to Dr. Phillips, a conservative estimate that adds an additional $3.75 million annually to your operating budget to operate these additional schools. In addition, 2016, there'll be another $750,000 necessary for the operations of Burris Elementary School. Challenges. Your major source of revenue that's under the discretion of the County Commission is property tax. The only other ones are sales tax, which requires referendum, and raising it would make you non-competitive and is very limited. The other one's will tax, and it's very similar, limited in size and limited in your ability. But looking at the growth of your property tax, there's been, since the fall of the economy, there's been a pervasive issue. Your growth is leveled out somewhere around 1%, which is actually less than inflation by itself. Also, in 2011, if you look, it actually was nearing to 0, which consequently is actually the year after reappraisal, which is the feeling that most of that is due to reappraisal. Actually, a lot of your growth was adjusted out that year. To give you an idea, we'll look at inflation, which the way your current reappraisal cycle is it goes in with revenue neutrality and removes your inflation. There was one anomalous year right after 2008 when the economy collapsed, but on average it's been running about 2%. So if you want a good comparison since the last tax raise in 2004, a dollar is only worth slightly under 80 cents. So you've lost about 21% of your buying power on your second largest revenue, which is actually your largest revenue in all funds except for school. The only revenue that's larger is your BP funds. To get a really good idea of how your property tax is performing, you'd compare the revenue to inflation and your population growth. If you look at the bottom number, this is the growth in your revenue for your property tax. The top number is the growth in the cost, which would be inflation and population growth. There's a year-over-year disparity, very large in 2011 and significantly large in 2014. When you apply these to your base rate, these aren't for 1 year, they come in year after year. To give you an idea for this year, property tax was somewhere around $80 million. So right there, you're looking at it in, almost a 3% gap in $80 million. And then you can apply it back. That's where your 21% came back from 2004. Another one we've got is our self-insurance programs, which have had considerable concerns for several years. This is the actual net assets of your self-insured health insurance fund, which has had a sizable deficit for a considerable number of years. In 2012, it actually had a deficit of about $6.3 million until there was a $3 million cash infusion and several changes in benefits and premiums. The dental fund, which is actually combined with it, looks pretty much the way we want it to. Slight upward arc in the reserves, very stable. The other one is what we call our liability or casualty fund, which is our liability and our OJI. OJI stands for On-the-Job Injury Program in lieu of workers' comp. In 2010, this program had $4.5 million of net assets. In 2014, it's a little over $1 million. All these former years back in here, there was no increases in the actual premiums. In this year, there was a 15% increase, a 10% increase, and in the current year, a 30% increase. To level this fund out and actually to start building back a small reserve, you're going to need an increase in premiums at least 30% next year. Which brings us back to some additional issues in the self-insurance fund. The self-insurance health and dental that we looked at on the earlier slide.
Hey, Mr. Long.
Yes, sir.
Again, just to reiterate, same as from budget, the chart is almost a little deceiving as if the problem became a major issue in that 2010. It's probably a 10-year-old problem.
This has been an issue for many years,
yeah,
since
we've
probably
never
the
dealt
80s.
with.
It's been the fund's basically been covered on a cash basis, and there was some issues with, before 2009, some misaccounted for premiums that weren't prepaid. So this has been a long-term issue that needs to be dealt with in the near-term future. The health and dental program actually is made up of 3 parts, which is the health and dental insurance for the county general, the highway, and the classified school employees, which comprise about 72%. These programs are going to split January 1, 2015, so the health plan and dental plan is accrual basis like a business, so it has long-term or longer-term liabilities such as runoff health insurance claims. But with this split, they're going to make them potentially short-term liabilities or cash liabilities early in January, February, March of 2015. So at that point, the commission really has 2 choices: send 72% of the liabilities to the schools, which creates a deficit over there, leave them all over here, which creates a cash issue, or find additional funding to wipe out the liability once and for all. The current program is pretty much running on break even, but the existing liabilities is still the issue. And the 30% increase on the liability on the job injury that I mentioned on the last slide is at least about $60,000 for the 2016 budget. This brings us to another concern, which is the operating disparities in your chief operating funds. What I mean by operating disparities is the difference between your revenue and expenditures. If we take your revenues minus your expenditures, this is the amount of fund balance that's budgeted each year. The concern is this is an actually increasing amount. This amount here is $4.4 million after the infusion on the original 15 budget with the 208 rate of $1 million from the debt service to make it down to the 4.4 number. If we add in the $2.5 million necessary to keep the self-insured health and dental going, it brings that number up to $6.9 million. Either one of these numbers long-term are not sustainable numbers. Additionally, we have a very similar issue in the school department of an ever-increasing disparity between revenue and expenditures. Solutions. To kind of give you an idea of the market of where you are on property tax rates compared to your surrounding counties, if we look at Davidson County, $4.50 some odd cents. Montgomery, which is your next largest county, 7th largest, Sumner County is the 8th largest, $3.14. Robertson County, your border county, $2.96. Cheatham County, which is in the metropolitan statistical area, $2.78. These are all 2014 rates. Wilson County, which is your most demographically comparable county, $2.57 some odd cents. Rutherford, which is very comparable, $2.56. Williamson, $2.31, which is in the metropolitan statistical area, but is not comparative because, for instance, Sumner County brings in slightly under $400,000 per penny. Williamson County is closer to $800,000. So it makes it very non-comparative. But when you drop in Sumner County, you're at in 2014, you were at 20208, which by far made you the lowest funded county. Here's a glance at your historical rates. If you want to look at the last time you've done a large bond for major capital improvement, it was when your tax rate was larger. That's why we're currently have zero debt capacity, because inflation's ate up a lot of your revenue stream and your capacity. Which brings me back to take in a tax rate that would actually cover your current capital needs, to lower your disparity, to make available resources to continue with the earlier mentioned initiatives. By my calculations, you need a tax rate of $2.50, which would be a minimum rate to not close the disparities, but to bring them to a more manageable level and allow resources for some of these initiatives to continue. Here's your cost per residential taxpayer. Sumner County's average house value is somewhere in here. So you're looking at about $15 a month. For just informational purposes, not applicable to taxpayers on the tax freeze, which Mr. Good mentioned earlier. If they have a combined household income of less than $35,680, and at least one of the residents' name that's on the deed is over 65, they qualify for tax freeze, which means this would not affect them. The other one gives you a cost per small business, because in Tennessee, small businesses pay property tax on real and personal property. They pay it on personal property in lieu of a tax on inventory. That's the monthly and the annual difference between the recommended certified rate of 20807 and the recommended, the actual recommended rate of 250. That's the personal property. Here's the differences of where a large portion, the majority, or not quite the majority, a large portion of the funding would go to is capital improvements. This is your current debt capacity for capital improvements. Zero capacity until 2025, which means without some additional revenues, all the projects mentioned for repairs and renovations, there's no funding available for basically 10.5 years. After that point, you have a combined capacity of somewhere around about $200+ million. With the additional recommended inflow of resources, it would allow you to create a capital improvement plan that looks like this, which would be 70 million, 25, 40, 60, 50, 50, and 50 through the foreseeable future, a reoccurring capital plan once you're caught up. By looking at that, the 70, 15, and 16 covers the majority of the projects on the former page, which were all estimates, which means this number could vary up or down. The 40 would be, the smaller than 60 would average you out over that period of $100 million. The additional resources from the 250 to 202, the 20807, a little under $2.4 million for county initiatives to close the revenue expenditure gap and to continue on with the SRO officers, library, judge, and all the other projects in place. Slightly under $7 million for opening borough school and other school initiatives, and the largest for capital improvement, slightly under $7 million. Recap of challenges and conclusions. Not counting in the $2.5 million for the health, which is one time, there's almost $22 million of reserves budgeted for the current budget for the schools and county, which is an unsustainable number at this point. So at this point, additional resources will be necessary by July 1st of next year, or services will need to be reduced to actually stabilize the funds. Because you have two issues. One is stabilization for your bond rating in the general fund, 3% fund balance rule in the school, which is going to be problematic to near impossible to handle July 1st without some additional resources. Property tax, one of your big issues, do not capture inflation, which we went over the 21% loss in buying power from 2004 to 14. An additional $2.5 to $3 million necessary January 2015 to cover the health insurance program. An additional $560 next year to stabilize your liability in OJI. an additional $3 million to complete on current dollars the already in the works initiatives, of which $1.6 million will be necessary for 2016. And you have zero capacity for any major capital initiatives at the current, where you currently stand at 20807. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Long.
Let's just, Mr. Good, for clarification purposes, why don't, if you have a question for Mr. Long, why don't you raise your hand, and Mr. Long, why don't you call on them? That way we won't have to go through the exchange.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you pull all the questions, if it's okay with you. I first would like to make a quick statement on our presentation, and if Mr. Taylor, Chris Taylor, our Vice Chairman, would like to comment on that as well.
Well, okay, but let's see if there's anybody here that has a question for Mr. Long while he's giving this presentation. Sure. Mr. Long, go ahead.
Mr. Vaughn.
I see on identified capital needs.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Economic development, $20 million, but I don't see anything broken out in there.
That was provided by Mr. Holden. I think the majority of it is for an industrial part. I'm sorry.
I had a question for Mr. Loring, but he directed to you.
They provided, the capital numbers were provided from the Director of Schools, County Executive, and various sources, so.
Can you spell some of those $20 million worth of spending out for us?
Well, Mr. Vaughn, I appreciate you putting me on the spot.
I'm good at that.
Let me put it like this. Without totally elaborating on what the initiatives are, I will bring those before you. I'm involved right now in a study by TVA to look at ways that we can stimulate our local economy and take advantage of the economic growth in the Middle Tennessee region. I would be happy to meet with you and discuss further details on the conclusion of that study and the proposals that they would set forth before this commission for your consideration for funding.
Am I still up?
Yeah, Mr. Vaughn, go ahead.
Well, I can appreciate that. However, I think when we start raising people's property taxes, I think we probably need a little bit more detail than just, we've got economic development, we want to spend some money. We've got a hospital fund that's specifically set out for economic development. I don't know where that stands right now.
Yes, sir, that money is available, and I factored that into that. But for large initiatives, requires quite a bit of capital commitment. So you're exactly right. There will be details on exactly what that includes. I really don't feel comfortable trying to go into all those details before that study is completed.
Thank you. I don't feel comfortable voting $20 million in tax increases on something I don't know about in advance. The Forest Retreat Interchange, I'm familiar with that. The Exposition Center, though, I'm not familiar with the Expo. I didn't know we had an Expo Center. That was Mr. Holden.
Yes, sir, that was another one.
Yes, sir. Just completed a 13-year lease on the Comer property, which includes about 15 acres, the Visitors and Tourism Bureau, and the historic barn right there. That would include completely renovating that facility and making it an expo center and using the grounds for concerts and other venues to attract tourism into Sumner County.
Out of that $1 million, how much of it is coming out of the tourism money? I understand we've got a growing tourism budget, hotel motel tax.
Currently, the hotel motel tax, in addition to anything over $350,000, actually becomes revenue towards your general fund for operations. So if we took hotel motel tax out of the general fund, then the disparity for 4.4 we discussed on the previous slide would increase to 4.6, 4.7. So everything over 350 becomes operational fund for, unless the commission approves otherwise, which they did this past year, actually becomes operating revenues for the general fund.
But I understand that's growing.
Right, but it's used to fund the general fund. So if you pulled the hotel motel tax money back out, which has not been segregated because it's legally not segregated, then the 4.4 some odd million would just become larger in the general fund, creating a larger hole in your operation. So it would really be counterproductive. To speak on the 20 million and the one and the others, these two right here are estimated at total 95 million, 70 and 25. The funds is not, 70 and 20. It is actually a revenue stream to create debt capacity over a 20-year amortization to create a long-term plan to create you a reoccurring revenue stream at the most advantageous. So if it came about that the 20 wasn't needed, then one, you would have the extra capacity for other projects, or two, you could shorten your amortization schedule. It's not that the 20 million would be unnecessarily raised taxes. It's basically needed for the overall capital plan.
I heard, go back over to chief operating funds, or chief operating funds operational disparities.
Yes, sir.
In that right there, it looks pretty rough right there. I see $2.8 million, almost 2.9 down in 2013. How much money would I know that was on paper.
Right.
How much money we actually bring out of there?
That's what I was saying. Those years we did not. That's why we need to start coming back to that level. That's what you've got is an increasing amount and an increasing amount of expenditures for 2016.
No, what my point is you got a disparity there of 2.8.
Right. These 2 years right here and right here, no. This one because of some, 13 months of board bills and
I'm
other
not
stuff.
worried about that part. I'm going backwards. 'Cause I heard a long list of monies that we spent over the past few years of coming out of our debt service or out of our savings account, basically. How much money do we actually spend?
Some years we spent some and some we came back in. So over the long run, there's been, the general fund's fund balance has been stable.
Yeah, okay.
The concern
that's
is,
all I need right there, Mr. Long. Thank you very much.
the
That's
concern
all, Mr.
is
Chairman.
the upward slide right here.
Thanks. All right, Mr. Taylor's in the queue. Mr. Taylor, you have a question?
Call for question on the motion when it hadn't been made yet, can you?
No, I don't think so.
But I do have a question.
We don't have a
for
motion.
Mr. Law, and
Yeah, go
on
ahead.
this, what will $50 on the wheel tax and a half-a-cent property and half-cent sales tax do?
I would have to look at the half-cent sales tax, but as I mentioned earlier, it's going to make you non-competitive with some of your surrounding counties. So when you start increasing that sales tax, you can project it based on the current sales tax, which is 9.25, so it's what, 2.25 local, so we could buy, but the problem you're going to have is a diminishing return because you're actually going to lose some sales. So that's a number I can provide you, and also it would have to go to referendum is my understanding.
Well, I'd like to see that number in the near future.
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman,
is there anybody else that has a question about this presentation?
I just want to address what was just said from Commissioner Taylor to remind him, and my colleague in front of me, Mr. Vaughn, pointed out to us that night. But we actually proposed secondary in 2012, looking at the opportunity to do a referendum with a wheel tax, which failed. And as it was pointed out to us that night that the voters spoke, and that was not a good option publicly as well as on this floor. So.
Okay, let me just say that let's keep this with questions on what the presentation was. Ms. Kemp? Yeah, Mr. Taylor.
I believe our rules and procedures refrain from us referring to each other by name. I would like to see those rules and procedures followed.
Okay, Mr. Taylor, thank you.
Ms.
Kemp?
Yes, sir. I've got a question with regard to the net property tax levy. The 1.33% that you have in there, is that comparable growth, or is that new growth added into that as well?
All of these are new growth, period. Because your property tax does not capture inflation unless you raise the rate. Every 5 or 6 years, when you looked at the earlier historical graph, every time they do a reappraisal, what happens is generally, and this time is an unusual situation with the other way, your actual property values are raised to market. When they raise them to market, they come in and they lower the rate to make it, in an attempt to make it revenue neutral, and it usually ends up being negative because of appeals and errors, which is natural and always happens. But Without happening, it actually pulls all your inflation out, so the numbers I'm showing you is actually purely growth, new property in the county.
Okay, so this 1.33 is just purely new growth,
Purely new growth.
taking out the revenue neutral properties that.
Yes, that's just
would
purely,
balance.
purely new property that's been added through improvement or construction.
Okay, so when you look at page number 2 under inflation, you're saying that the inflation rate, and I'm just trying to make sure I understand this, is 2.07%, correct?
Inflation is larger than your growth, yes, ma'am.
So basically at that point, we're right at about negative 0.8%.
Yes, ma'am, but it gets worse than that because at the same time, if you add in the population, because you've got new citizens, you have to provide new services. That's the graph where I added the two together, which gives you a more comparable number.
And that's that next sheet comparing the 386 versus the 102.
Yes, ma'am. So basically, since the fall of the economy in 2008, and you've leveled out to a little better than 1% property tax growth, your property tax growth is basically not keeping up with inflation or growth. So
Okay,
you've got a lot of
when
new.
people talk about growth, we're talking about straight growth, but no accounting for inflation.
Right, yes,
or
ma'am. You
population.
don't count for inflation, and when people talk about growth, what you've also got to think about is if you have, for instance, your wheel tax, majority of it, 70% goes to the schools. When there's growth, a lot of that growth has children, which go to the schools, which you have to cover new students. And what you're really doing is covering the new students at the non-inflated rate. So, for instance, if you buy milk for a student over the last 10 years, that milk's went up, but we're covering it at the old rate, trying to cover the new students with growth. So basically, the reason the 250 is a more fitting rate to continue your services is it will bring you back closer to inflationary. If you take the 0.79 and multiply or divide Mr. Isabel's 20807 by it, it'd bring you to a rate of now 262, which comes back closer in that 259 field that you've seen in the earlier historical graphs.
Okay, in another slide, you've got listed the comparable rates of the different counties.
Yes, ma'am.
And obviously, we're at the bottom of the rung. And people say that we're probably most commonly compared to Wilson County
Yes, ma'am.
at 257.
Yes. Yeah, here we go.
How do they fall in comparison to per capita income compared to Sumner County?
I could have pulled that number, but I didn't, and I actually have a piece of paper right here that I can give you next. Demographics out of the 95 counties, Sumner County is fourth in medium household income. It's fourth in medium house value. It's eighth in population, 93rd in poverty rate, which just means we've got a very low poverty rate. We're 68th in tax rate statewide, 68th in percentage of tax burden to household value, and 53rd percentage of tax burden to household income.
Okay,
So we're in the lower halves.
can you compare that to where Wilson County is?
I
Their
could
rate?
pull Wilson County, but I don't have the exact ones here, but that's one of your more comparable counties.
And then probably one of my last questions is, initially in the initial presentation, we went back through, I think it was like 5 years, 6 years of our deficit spending in the county.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that correct? Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, and what I'm proposing tonight would not actually close those deficits. That would just bring those deficits closer to where they were at the couple of years back. And it would also bring in some additional revenue for the sessions judge, the opening of the library, and for your SRO officers.
My question in that is that we've consistently budgeted, we've deficit budgeted, is what I'm reading into that. Is there a reason why we budget without money coming in to back what we're budgeting?
Yes, ma'am, there's a couple of reasons. One is we're pretty conservative on revenue projections because in 2008, 2009 fiscal year before I got here, there was very reasonable revenue projections, but the economy collapsed. So we budgeted a lot of the revenues based on a normal economy or slightly below where we're at because we have a good economy. So some of that's where you're picking up revenue. Additionally, by state statute, you cannot exceed your appropriations. So when you take a $50-some million budget and you, for instance, have 5% of it not spent, then you've got $2.5 million coming back in. So if you take in a 3 to 5% non-expenditure level and then add in an additional $1 million of revenue, then you come back neutral. But the problem being right now is what's happening is the actual disparity between revenues and expenditures are increasing. And on top of that, there's several initiatives that are in the works, and there's not an actual growth to fund those. And for instance, what happened in the current year, some money was taken out of debt service and in other years to fund some of these, but that basically money's all used up at this point.
Okay, and we talked a little earlier about the identified capital needs, and I think that's where the economic development question came from Mr. Vaughn. If we, and I'm going to go back to what Chris indicated in his numbers, it looked like if we start at the new neutral rate of 208 and some change, and we add in the economic development, the forest retreat, the expo center, and the airport, we're at about 229. Is my understanding correct?
You would do, to actually fund the capital outlay plan, which would include the schools and the others, it would actually take, just to fund that, it would take a rate of 20807 plus an additional 18 and 7/100ths of a cent. So it'd be
And that includes the $70 million for the schools?
the 70? Yes, ma'am. That creates, when you looked at the capital improvement, right now you have no capacity to 2025. It would create your near-term capacity, and it would be combined when the existing's retired to create a long-term capacity. So yes, it's in that total long-term plan, which is based on two things: your currently known needs plus your history. Your history of the last 10 years was about $191 million. The county's growing in size, prices are growing because of inflation, so you can project that forward that you're going to need in excess of $200 million every 10 years, basically.
So the other 20 cents, what is?
It goes to a little over 6 cents to the general fund to help fund these operational disparities and for these initiatives, and 17.75 cents for the general purpose school fund. The issue being, when I mentioned the last one, there's $22 million worth of reserves budgeted in the general purpose school fund. If a significant portion, the schools, based on the applicable appropriations, has to have 3% in their fund balance. If we continue this year on and eat a significant portion of the reserves, then when you go in next year, you're going to have to raise revenue to put back that eaten reserve. Plus, if you don't know, if you try to approve a budget in, say, June or July, you're not going to have a good feel what those reserves are. Out of a $200 million budget, it's basically 200 plus million. It's a moving target. So Dr. Phillips, I would say, just like me, is going to be conservative with that number, because if he overprojects that fund balance, then what's going to happen is he's going to be here, get a budget approved with the revenue and his projected reserves. He overprojects it, he doesn't meet his 3%, so he comes back to the county commission and asks for additional revenue to meet his 3%, or he cuts services. The only other course of action would be, if the commission's not willing to fund the addition, the current level of services, and he can't project his fund balance, then one, you're going to have to stall operations, or two, you're going to actually have to decrease operations. And with them being 85, 90% salaries, we'd be talking teachers, assistants, custodians, and Dr. Phillips can tell me if I'm wrong on the situation, but I believe I'm correct. So right now, it's not as much a concern where you're at now. You could approve this budget at 20807, run forward tonight, but two issues are going to come out. One, the stuff that he presented the other day for the repairs can't happen. The economic development can't happen because there's no money. And on top of that, at the beginning of the next fiscal year, the school's budget's going to be very problematic, to say the least. You've got the potential, because of your insurance, that you're going to eat some of your unassigned fund balance, which is going to shrink it. In addition, because since 2009, you've picked up 2 bond ratings, you're a AA+. If you're not keeping costs with expenditures, you could potentially lose your bond rating. So there's a whole gambit of factors that could potentially hurt you, but by actually using up all your reserves.
Well, obviously a budget's been passed for this year.
Yes, ma'am.
And so if you stay at the 208 to make it neutral, do you have enough money to pay for just what budget has been passed?
Yes, ma'am, but the 20807 will fund the budgets you've got, but it will not fund any of the capital projects. There's no capital project money at all. In addition, the projections are that a significant...
So it'll pay for the judge,
Okay, it'll pay for the judge that was shown up in the, let's see, go back to this
Half a
one.
year.
It'll pay for the 215, but not the second half. It'll pay for the 70,000 on Millersville, but not the 131. It will pay for the existing SRO officers, but not the 5 new projected out for next year and the next year and the next year. And in addition, because
And
of the,
we've committed to those.
that was the, unless you're changing your initiatives or your long-term plan, it was the plan, and somebody tell me if I'm wrong, to actually add 5 new SRO officers a year, because understanding for the sheriff, there's a limit on the number of people that can actually even go to the training. It was about 5 a year. But the resources were limited too.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
as-
hold on.
as Chairman,
Is there anybody that has not asked, that needs to ask a question that hasn't spoken yet? Okay, Mr. Good.
Yeah, I just want to address Commissioner Kemp a couple, and reiterate what was actually just said in kind of really layman's terms. We can do the 208, Mr. Isabella's tax increase proposal of 6 cents to be neutral. But essentially, in July, we can't even make payroll. So we can do that to get through the next few months. We can do that to get through the next few months. And the alternative is that we will then, again, be doing one of two things: drastically cutting services and the things that we promised we would do, or coming up with additional revenues then. So tax increase then, tax increase now, massive cuts in between, combination of.
The big difference of doing it now versus then is to preserve your fund balance. If you don't preserve your fund balance and you still have to meet the 3%, that means the revenue or cash infusion to the general purpose school fund will have to be larger, or if it ends up being cuts, then the cuts will have to be larger. That's kind of, this year's budget's workable. The real problem you've got is if there's urgent capital needs, there's no funding source for it right now. You can dip into your
So a
fund
roof.
balance, but that would be catastrophic.
If we got a major roof issue, we couldn't,
You would have to, basically where you've got right now, your $5 million is used up, all of it. If you had a major roof in the county or the schools, then the schools, because they're 5%, probably can't even dip into the fund balance. So really, we've got an issue there. The general fund, you'd have to go back and dip into the general fund. And as we're saying tonight on the next item, the $182,000 for the airport, which is my understanding, the airport's very necessary for the growth of your county, and this project's necessary for it to continue on. Without additional capital funding, it's going to need to come from your fund balance, which that $4.4 million disparity is only increased by adjustments. So it's not as much an issue now as it's going to create a major issue July 1 in operations, and your issue right now is lack of capital funding.
okay, can you explain for me one more time, and I'm a little slow on the uptick. The 230 would cover most of that, but then we're going an extra 20 cents, and explain to me what that is again.
6 cents to actually, when we go look at those disparities in the general fund,
Mr. Long, can you direct her also to page 2 on the handout? It shows the breakdown.
yes, ma'am. It's on my memorandum. It's a separate memorandum that looks like this right here. It's got a, there should be one on everybody's desk. Page 2 actually has the recommended rate and shows the breakdown besides the revenue numbers, the actual breakdown. Okay.
Ms. Kemp, does that answer your question?
This may help right here. It's to actually, see this upward slanting pattern? These, like this year, there's actually $1 million of revenue added from the debt service fund to keep that from being 5.4. And I'd have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure some was added there. Well, with no additional resources next year and the debt service, the same low growth rate and increasing inflation, we've got a growth in property tax and that's picked up a little bit. But if you look at the other number, inflation's picked up by as much, plus your population's picked up. So that means there's going to be nowhere near the growth you're going to need for those initiatives. So this number right here in the next year's budget is actually going to increase more. Plus anything you've got to do this year is going to increase that number. There's already a ever-growing disparity. Plus the issue with the self-insurance fund, which is going to come from fund balance. So if you raise revenues this year, the amount of revenues will take you back down into this area for this year, and then the additional 2 will push you back into here where you want to be more, and it will also make available revenues for those initiatives, which were the remainder of the Millersville Library, but there's kind of speak about, there's actually a contract with the city of Millersville to operate the library after construction from the former commission. And there's also the 5 new SRO officers next year and the completion of the Sessions Judge operation. Without those, then, if there's no, additional revenue or significant cuts, and the budgets are pretty tight, then basically this number here is going to increase significantly next year. And you're going to eat a pretty good portion of your fund balance right in here, about $2.45 million. So basically, this would be more of a proactive approach versus coming in July 1 with lower fund balances, trying to rebuild those, and raising taxes at the last minute.
All right, Mr. Graves.
What's a total property tax collected per year? I thought I heard you say.
It will just be the current collections that we don't include, and it will be on page, the projected width at the 250 rate would be on page number 3 at the top far right. At 208, it will be on page 5 at the top at the far right, under current property tax.
I don't see no numbers on these pages. I got the wrong one. Is there a number? Can you tell me that number of that we haven't looked?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. It's in this one right here. That's why I told
It's in
you.
the other handout.
For the 250, it would be slightly under 98 million. For the 20208, it would be slightly under 82 million. So that's when you look at these disparities between inflation, revenue, and growth. This is your second largest revenue number for the county and schools. The only thing that exceeds this is BEP funding, and not by a large amount at this point. It's a little over 23 million.
What's the total revenue for the county?
For just the county funds or the county and schools?
Total, everybody.
And I would have to pull that number, but I believe it's somewhere upward of about $350 million. Yes.
I got one more. The counties that were showed on the property tax, which one of those counties had more students than we do have?
That would be more, I wouldn't really have that number unless Dr. Phillips would happen to know that. And probably Dave. That probably might be. And the other thing is kind of playing against the county in comparison to some of these other counties, their sales tax per capita low too. We've caught up a lot in the last couple of years, but you're still lagging behind because you have a lot of bleed over into Davidson and surrounding counties. That's why I mentioned that the sales tax would probably hurt you, because right now you're making a pretty good pickup on sales tax.
I looked at 7 counties that in Middle Tennessee and looked at various numbers for the school system and doing my due diligence this morning. And I can tell you that Davidson County has 82,806 students. They rank number 1 in the counties of Middle Tennessee. The next one is Robertson County, the next one is Montgomery County with 31,297. We are 6, Sumner County is 6 out of 7 county number of students with right under 29,000 as of last fiscal year.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Bond?
Keep hearing about the General Sessions Court, Judge. We budgeted $500,000 for that, I believe.
It was 215.
Well, 215, but I mean, total we expected to be about 500,000 to operate that.
Yes, sir, but we've heard some that's somewhere between 450, 550. Yes.
Okay, and how much money do we expect to gain out of the increase in the fees that we're going to be charged?
For, you mean the litigation tax related to the judge, I
Yes.
believe it was around, and I'll look right here.
About 119?
I think it's about 110.
Okay.
It was around 110.
Well, I just want to make a point that some of that money's already been, it's going to be recovered in that. At
Yes,
least.
out of the 450 to 550, about 100 of it will be recovered
Thank you, sir.
from lit taxes.
Any other questions for Mr. Loing on the presentation? Mr. Loing, I want to compliment you and your staff for putting this together. I know there was a lot of effort, a lot of time that went into this, and we appreciate the information that you brought to us this evening. All right, Mr. Good, I'm going to turn it back over to you now as the chairman of the Budget Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I want to defer, Mr. Chairman, for a second to my Vice Chairman, Mr. Taylor, Chris Taylor, that has some commentary, and I'm presuming we might generate some additional floor chatter before we close, if that's okay.
Okay. Mr. Taylor? Technical difficulties. Hold on just a minute. Okay.
Sir, I'll gladly go over it again, but I think everybody was in the room present, and I hate to make it a second. Oh, yes, sir, I will. Okay.
Okay.
Just a few of the points. One, Mr. Long is very conservative. I think that's a fantastic thing for a finance director. He's also kind of cheap, and so he cuts things a lot closer. The reason I say that is when we added up earlier, I apologize a second. When you pulled the numbers out and you added the new judge in, that was about a penny or so, a little bit over. When you added the SROs, that ended up being about 9.5 cents. I apologize, I'm going off memory right now. And then when you add in the additional health insurance where we have to put in $3 million to get it back up, and then additionally the, yeah, thank you. The last part, it got the rate to 2.29. And the reason I say it was 2.29 was that was just to make good on the things that we as a commission have already committed to throughout the next year's budget. When you go to 250, that additional 20 cents is more so than anything making a continuing, reoccurring, the best way to say it is, let me think about it, a reoccurring fund just to do capital improvements. And he has it listed as 70 million, 25 million. What it boils down to is it's about 50 million every other year. And what we said was to plan long-term for a county, you've got to be willing to make some inroads. We know we're going to have growth. The growth we've seen is from 2005 till now, it's looking at about 18% right now, and there's been no increase in any kind of services. So that's a big drain on a lot of them. When you look at the sheriff's department, you look at the health department, all those others, and none of those are factored into this 250 rate at all. So this is just merely to do capital funding. When we say that, the schools that need to be redone have needed to be redone for a while. So that's there. When you start looking at some other things that we look at, there's 700 to 800 families in the northern part of the county that do not have running water. And that's not something we can neglect or ignore for any longer. You're not going to get growth in that part of the county, not to mention the fact that those people need the dignity of having water going to their homes. That's the last price tag was $30 million. You can't do that with that unless you have a recurring capital fund. And the reason I say that is the investment into the county will pay off in the long run. When you look at that 20 cents, for a $100 million bond, you need about $7 million, $7.5 million a year to pay off the debt services, and that was like 14, 15 pennies. And then the other 6 pennies to get that 250 is some of it's used for that disparity, the $6 million disparity or so that we have from what we're bringing in to what we're actually spending. Numbers-wise, he's real conservative in the sense that as long as the economy stays good, everything goes along smoothly, we will have money for capital funds. And when I say that, again, that's the schools, that's buildings, that's running water, that's doing those types of things, the economic improvements, all that. But that doesn't impact in any shape, form, or fashion either one of the budgets, the big budgets we have, which is schools and general county. It doesn't put in raises for people. It doesn't hire additional staff to make up for the 20,000 some odd people that are coming by 2020. 5 years away, the census projects us to be in at 201,000. That's a big number, and especially when you're trying to use the same resources you had at 175,000. So those are things we have to think about at some point or another. I'm not saying tonight, obviously, but it's something we as a commission have to be prepared to address at some point. The main thing is the 229 gets us to where we're good. The 250 allows us to start growing and planning for the future. I'm sure I left some things out. I apologize, but.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Question for the law director, Mr. Chairman. Do we need to address that issue at this juncture or on the certified rate of Mr. Isbell's, or
At some point, we do need to just accept what the certified rate is, which is the 2.0807, because it was not done when the budget was
Okay.
passed.
So we have to do that before we can even change it. So for the sake of conversation, I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman, that we take the accepted rate from Mr. Isabel's office and to move on.
Okay, all right, so what, all right, there's a motion, is there a second? Ms. Lamar has a second. So what we're doing is that we are voting to accept the certified rate that has, that's been handed down to us at this point.
That's correct, and it's my understanding from the law director that we have to do that first with the budgets that we've passed, and then we can still continue the conversation on the change.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Okay, there is a motion, there is a second. Mr. Taylor, do you have an amendment? You have go ahead.
Yeah, I have a comment and a question.
All right.
I'll start with the question. What was the rate that the state gave us in June?
That was the rate.
2.807.
So here we are in November at the same rate. Here we are holding up tax bills. Here we are putting cities in the bind. Here we are spending unneeded money. I didn't sign. I didn't get in the middle of it. I was vice chairman of the budget committee last term. I heard enough, I listened enough that I wasn't going to sign on to that. So we wasted almost $100,000 of taxpayer money, and we're at the same rate 5 months later. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other comments before we vote? Okay, do you have that ready? Okay, that is on the board.
Approval of the certified tax rates on the board. Each commissioner, please record your vote. $22 votes are entered. Anyone not voting wish to vote? Anyone wish to change your vote? Receives 19 affirmative votes.
Okay, then that motion passes. Mr. Good?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a real quick summary and open it back up to the floor with your permission. We have, as it's been spelled out here tonight, have not addressed in 11 years any revenue with all the growth that Mr. Chris Taylor just spoke of, or dealt with inflation, and at the same time that we add these, all the schools, the capital, and the recurring expenses. The proposal, again, less than the tax increase from 11 years ago, still, if it were to pass, would make us the lowest county taxed in Middle Tennessee in that same range, with the exception of Williamson, as was pointed out. And to add to what Vice Chairman Taylor said, to that bond capacity is, if we do not do this, that bond capacity, correct me if I'm right, Mr. Long, we're at 2025 before anything as far as that would happen. And we do nothing else, and we cut some of the promises we've already made is our only option, with the exception between now, as was pointed out when Commissioner Kemp asked a question, we can get through the next few months, but we would go in the next budget year far into the red and have to make drastic cuts and or create revenue at that juncture. And I'd like to just defer back to the floor at your, whatever you think, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Is there a motion from the floor about where we would set our property tax rate? Mr. Vaughn?
What did we just do?
We set the certified rate. We had to accept the certified rate.
Okay, we adopted the 2014 tax rate, is that right?
No, we accepted the certified rate sent from the state and from the tax assessor's
Well, the way I take it, we adopted the 2014 tax rate. So I think we're outside our call. I'm just going to make, okay. Well, I'm going to make that a point of order and.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Recognize. Mr. Good?
I make a motion that we accept Mr. Long's recommendation and set a tax rate at 250. Not so
All right.
moved.
There is a motion by Mr. Good that we go at 250 for our tax rate. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Pomeroy. All right, now we are open for discussion. The first one in the queue is Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on what Commissioner from the 6th District just mentioned, as I look at my call here, there was no discussion of a tax rate increase. Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure that we're within our call? I understand that if we propose to increase the tax rate, that we must put that in the call.
No, sir. All what is required is that the tax rate, the intent to exceed the certified tax rate has to be noticed in the newspaper. That's been done twice.
That the intent to exceed?
Yes, sir.
Why was that not in our call?
Because the call was to set the 2014 tax rate, and that could be
But does that limit our call?
to setting the 2014 tax rate, be it at whatever you set it.
Okay, I think there will be a big question about this. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Hyde. Mr. Taylor, Mr. Mo Taylor.
Well, I hate to say so, but I kind of predicted this. 40-something cents, not 2 months ago, I believe. You can refer back to the minutes and the recordings. I'm a little suspicious of this as well as the previous conversations that went about the call of the meeting. I'm a little suspicious about a lot of things, and I'm not going to keep everybody down here talking a lot because we've already been here an hour and a half too long. If we're going to have a call meeting at 7 o'clock, we ought to have a meeting at 7 o'clock. But with all the questions that's already been raised, I'd like to make a motion to table this.
Okay, there's a motion from Mr. Taylor that we table this. Is there a second? We have a second from Mr. Vaughn. All right, discussion. No, oh, it's not discussable. Sorry. Okay. Give Mr. Kemp an opportunity to get this on the board.
All right, the motion to table is now on the board. Each commissioner, please record your vote.
What that means is if you vote for this, then we have, then we're through for the evening. And we go back to the...
Next item on the agenda, we do have another item.
We have another item on the agenda, but as far as the tax rate is concerned, it'd be gone. That would be it.
Okay, so by voting no to this, it means that we're voting to table?
No, to table it, you would vote yes. To not table it, you vote no. Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Motion to table is on the board. Each commissioner record your vote. We have 22 votes entered. Anyone wishing to change your vote? Motion to table fails to receive the 2/3 vote. We're back on the motions on the floor.
Okay, Mr. Gamenden? Well, it was on. Turn it. Yeah, turn. When the red light comes on. There you go. Now you're ready.
Okay. Well, first of all, I didn't vote to table the motion because I thought that it would have to have a time limit of when to take it off the table. You know, would it be indefinite or what? That was one thing. But then the other thing before that, I take this, and I take this very, very seriously, and I know everybody else does here also. And my wife and I, we were in Hendersonville yesterday, and she was doing a little shopping in different places, and we came back through, stopped at Starbucks in Gallatin, seen the Kroger there. my point is, we saw thousands and thousands of cars and people in those cars. And I just made the comment to her, I said, tomorrow, 13 people will pass a tax rate for all these people. And that's why I take it very serious. And I know many other people do. And Mr. Lowen, I would like to commend him. I have trusted the things that he's told us very much so for the last 4 years. And but there is a couple of things in that in this proposal that do bother me. But I guess the main thing that bothers me, and you could say, well, you should have voted to table it, but is the fact that up until I toured 6 of the schools last Thursday, 2 of them in Portland, and believe me, there are things that need doing. Really, they really need doing. One thing, the portables need to be gone. They've been there ever since my daughter graduated in 1994, and those portables were at elementary school when she was there, some of them. But I guess the thing that bothers me the most is even last Friday, I had just put together bits and pieces. I kind of had in my mind that we were going to come here tonight and do the certified tax rate and then worry about tax increase for other things a little bit later on. And I just put together bits and pieces of what I've heard and came to the conclusion that we were going to do a tax increase. And it just bothers me some that maybe not enough people or the general public don't really realize and know enough about what we're doing. I called a few people today, and I will tell you, of my constituents, their comments was, well, we really don't want to see a tax increase, but we know that it's eventually coming, and do whatever you feel is best. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Foster?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, I was also torn by looking at considering a tax increase, and so I went through and looked at 6 other counties surrounding us. And first, I got to correct myself on an earlier statement. Mr. Graves said Rutherford actually is second with 41,497. I'd ranked this schedule I'd done in per pupil expenditures, so that's how I messed up on that. But anyway, let's face it. The gorilla in the room is the school system. It's 87%. I think I'm right in the entire budget. So I looked at where we were spending the most money in the schools compared to our neighboring counties. And I'll also look compared to 2004 when we last had a tax increase and ranked the ranked the counties. In 2004, out of the 7 counties I looked at, Sumner County was number 6 in per pupil expenditures with $6,162, and number 1, of course, was Davidson with $8,885. So I looked at 2004 compared to this year, and we haven't moved. We're also 6 out of the 7 counties in per pupil dollar expenditures in fiscal year 2013, 2014. So basically, we've stayed the same in the ranking, but we've increased our per pupil expenditures in that time frame by 33%, but we still haven't caught up with surrounding counties. As the commissioner mentioned, there are severe infrastructure needs. And the long time ago, 6 months ago, when I was campaigning to be county commissioner, I ran on several things: improving the quality of life in our county, promote economic development, planning for short-range and long-range infrastructure changes. I'm philosophically opposed to a tax increase. I'm for small taxes, limited government, and freedom for government intervention for Americans. But we come to a point where I feel like I resent the fact that I have to vote for this large increase because I know it's going to hurt some families, and I don't like that part. But we come to the part where we have to do things to go forward. There are people on the commission that have a vision for our county, and we can't get there by staying where we are. And I want to leave it by quoting someone that we all know about, the son of Max Dupree, who's the son of the Herman Miller Office Company. Anybody who worked in an office has sat in their chair or opened a file cabinet. And he said, in the end, it's important to remember that we cannot become what we need to be by remaining what we are. And that's exactly where we are, Mr. Chairman. And I think leadership, in my opinion, is not just saying no, it's making the hard choices. And that's what we face as a commission tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vaughn?
I wish I was as well prepared. If I'd been given the same opportunity to know that a tax increase was on the floor tonight, I could have probably come a little bit more prepared. And I know this is probably falling on deaf ears, Mr. Chairman, but let me recap. Within the past 2 hours, almost 3 hours now, we came up here and we're about to impose about a 20% tax increase on the citizens of Sumner County. And about the comment about we can't go anywhere, well, I have to disagree. And I've heard some comments about growth. We've come through some pretty tough economic times, and we've come out the other side. And we're down that path now to growth. We've got major corporations coming to Sumner County now. And one of the reasons why they came here was for our conservative form of government. The fact that we were fiscally conservative and we have not raised taxes. I don't know what that's going to do to our future. We're about to start down that path. I hope it doesn't unplug it. I hate to see what we're about to do. Back during the discussions over the wheel tax and over property tax increases and stuff in the past, I've had those calls and those letters from those folks that said, please, Commissioner, don't raise my taxes because I'm going to have to make a choice on where I spend my money. Do I keep my home? Am I able to pay my property taxes, or am I able to get my medication? I've had those phone calls. I've had those letters. And what we're about to do in 3 hours is impose a 20% increase on these folks. And I hate to see it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Pomeroy?
I am perplexed at this time. I've had a lot of thoughts as we've been here and we've looked at this issue. First of all, I'm perplexed that a little over a month ago I voted no on a school budget that anybody that could do simple math would know would require more revenue than we have currently to pass. However, some of the people who voted for that budget are now prepared not to vote to fund it. That's perplexing to me. I can't understand that thought process. And I am new to this commission. However, when I look back at what has been done, that seems like it's been a pattern. I'm not the smartest guy in the room. However, I know on the theory that we've been running our county on, basically every time you get a raised appraisal, you come in as a commission and you lower your tax rate to stay neutral. 24 people have decided to draw a line in the sand sometime around 2005 and say from this point forward, nothing will ever cost any more than it does today. And by that same theory, eventually we would get to no tax rate, assuming that appraisals went up every single year. We would just keep lowering it. We would have zero tax rate. My father called me the other day and was complaining about his feet hurting him, so I went to his house and he said, I saw his boots. They're about a $20 pair of boots. I said, Dad, these are the cheapest boots I've ever seen. You work on your feet all day. Why don't we go buy you some good boots? He said, well, a good pair of boots costs $200. When I was a kid, I could get a good pair of boots for $20 when I started working. I said, well, we got a choice, Dad. Your feet can hurt or you can go buy some good boots. Kind of makes sense. And where we're at right now as a commission, and why I ran for this office, is for the last decade, we've seen these pains start coming, and then we just start saying, well, I can just hurt a little bit longer. I'll just hurt a little bit longer. And that's no way to govern. I took a lot of heat for my stance on the school budget a month ago. From some, they said I was doing the right thing. I strictly wanted to prove the point that you can't govern looking backwards. You can't showboat, say things, vote for past judgeships, vote for budgets that increase spending, and then come in here and look at these citizens and say, well, we're not going to vote to fund it. It's embarrassing. My commissioner beside me addressed that it's the schools that's the grill in the room. I disagree with that. That's a big part of the problem. However, I was in a fire hall Saturday that does not have a running toilet, and the people who are in charge of keeping my home from burning down use the restroom in a bucket. I would consider that a problem. I picked limbs up out of a 62-year-old neighbor of mine's yard after the last storm because our county no longer picks up limbs, a service that we provided up until the last 2 years ago. He had let me know that he was not a proponent of a tax increase. I said, congratulations. His home's valued at about $150,000. I said, congratulations. You've avoided about $600 in taxes over the last 10 years, and if I hadn't helped you, you'd got to pay John's tree service $1,200 to move this tree. I guess I'm a better neighbor than you thought. The point is you can't continue to take less revenue and then complain about the services. We're not paving roads at the rate that we once were. We're not doing much needed improvements to our schools, to our county buildings, and we're all doing it in the name of conservatism. And that's bothersome. So I urge this body tonight to say, let's make a change. And down the road, I challenge us to stick with that change. I will vote never to raise the tax rate again if 13 other people don't vote to lower it every time the appraisals go up. Let's set the rate. Let's leave the rate. And when we have some good years, then we have some money. When the appraisals turn down, then it's a little bit tighter. But what we did is we raised, appraisals went up, and we thought we would be political about it and say we'll lower our tax rate so we can say revenue neutral. And then all of a sudden the economy fell out, so now we got no rate and no appraisal value for the last 8 years. And I guess we're conservative. That's a bothersome story to me. So I say all that to say we've been here for 3 hours. This is no surprise. It hadn't been just tonight. It hasn't just been during this campaign season. This has been happening for the last decade. And I guess we can vote to table, glad we didn't, and just keep worrying about that down the road. Or we can do what our people elected us to do and try to run this county the best way we see fit. I believe it's time that we start investing in our county. I believe it's time that we start being proactive instead of reactive. I plan on voting on this increase because it's needed. Another month ago, we had a discussion right here on this panel about whether we should take a grant from the federal government to help give water to some of our citizens. I'm thankful that we voted for that. It's about time we quit leaning on the federal government and we start taking our own responsibility and handling our own business. That's why these people elected us. Sometimes it's not easy. But my question to the rest of this commission is, if not now, then when? And if not us, then who? But it's got to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Bill Taylor? Is it on?
A couple of comments. First of all, I feel like we need to invest in our community. I see hundreds of new children every year, every month to come to my office, and when I ask them, why'd you move from California to Tennessee? Well, we like Middle Tennessee. Why'd you move to Sumner County? Because we like the schools. And I think of Witten, for example, with 5 portables sitting out there falling apart, and the other schools, Guild's littered with portables. All that needs to be cleared up. That's part of that $70 million. 17 years ago, our tax rate was $2.90. Had we left it alone for 17 years, we'd still be lower than what Robertson County is. Now, I don't think we should take a back seat to any county that's surrounding us, but there are some counties that are really struggling. And we're doing a wonderful job, but I think we, as Chris Taylor, can't say your name. Said the minimum we have, he came up with the pennies how he got the increase. We've just been, we've been, I think, economically and irresponsible. We've borrowed since 2010 $22 million from some reserve, either hospital or reserve fund, to balance the budget. Not many people can officially or effectively balance their budget by borrowing money every year. We attract businesses. We've gotten one big business now. We got to do more than just attract one business with 300 new employees maybe. We lost one business many years ago because the airport was too short, and they moved on to Nashville. But we need to be more prudent. We need to be economically responsible. But the wheel tax is another thing, which is a tax on the poor. You tax the wheel tax, everybody who drives a car now has to pay more money. Well, those people, some of these people don't even have a house to live in, so now they got to. It's an unfair tax. I think we can tax property taxes, and you look at the average property tax. If we go with recommendations which we have been recommended, it's 3 Big Macs a month. That's what you're giving up if you want to break even. Now, to me, we're not taxing people to death. We're actually bringing more business, more economic opportunities, more services, and improving the things we have to make our county and community be more on a competitive level, and then we can attract more businesses that we want to have here. Thank you.
Mr. Mo Taylor?
Well, I'd like to, I don't know what to do really. I'd like to go home, but that ain't gonna happen for a while. Doesn't look like. And here I keep talking, so. But anyways, there's just a lot of stuff flying and stuff. Start taxing your people to death. You'll stop the growth. You won't have to worry about it. You'll have empty school buildings sitting out there with nobody to go to them. Start taxing your people to death. You can say that a wheel tax is not a fair tax. Well, a property tax is not a fair tax. You can say no tax is a fair tax. I want no taxes, but that's not logical. Wheel tax catches more people that doesn't pay taxes. Not everybody in this county pays property taxes. Sales tax, well, not everybody, believe it or not, in this county pays sales taxes. You know why? Because they use their card. Nothing, if they're in that shape, that's fine. But I'm not putting it all on the backs of the property owners of this county. I will not vote for that. I will not do it. I've said it. We're 2 months into this term. Well, this is actually the 3rd month. And we're already spending money like it grows on trees. They'll be calling us Washington before long. Thank you.
Mr. Hyde?
Mr. Chairman, I feel very fortunate in that I draw a pension from the public sector. I had a secure job. The public sector is pretty secure, nice benefits, good pension. And the best I count, there are 11 of the 24 of us that draw from the public sector. And I would hope, based upon the needs in my district, that the 11 of us who do would be the most sensitive ones to the struggle that some of the people face at this time. I'm not going to speak very long about this, but one day I was standing in front of this administration building, and a gentleman, I was talking to a public official that I won't name because I didn't ask him if I could name him. A gentleman pulled up in a work truck, work clothes, and was counting his money as he walked up to the building. He said, "I'm sorry, gentlemen, I am $1 short of getting my license tags. Would you please give me $1? I gave him $1. 5 minutes passed, we were talking. He returns to us from the building and said, "I miscalculated. I was $2 short. Would you give me another $1? And I did. I gave him another $1. About a week later, I received this note from a Tony, and I wish he had given me his last name with the $2 that I've never spent. And he got someone to type a little note thanking me because I had given him one of my cards for giving him the $2 to get his license tag. We sit here sometimes and we look about us and we think that everybody is living as we're living. They are not. I have people in my district. I'm in Hendersonville, but my district is a very average community. Mom works, dad works, kids are at home most of the time, many times unsupervised. They struggle. They have been cut back in hours at work. Yes, they're working, but their hours have been cut back, their benefits have been cut back, and now with health insurance the way it is, I have many of them telling me that they have a $5,000 deductible on their insurance, which is incurring major medical expenses for these people. That's all I have to say other than the fact, I mean, I appreciate everyone saying, I'm going to do the right thing and I want you to do the right thing. And that's what you were elected to do. But I think from what I heard during the election too, people do not want a tax increase. And if we were to put this tax issue on a referendum, it would not pass in Sumner County. And I was sent here to represent those people. The last tax increase was brought up here. I happen to have been here. I may have even made the motion for that tax increase. The next election, this county commission was emptied. People have a long memory. As a matter of fact, I am the only surviving person on this commission who voted for a tax increase. And I'm not taking this position because of that. I'm taking this position because people in my district are hurting. And we are receiving, I think there is a little bit of confusion about the appraisal, which our tax assessor has taken a beating for, but we need to be aware of the fact that almost all of his work has been affirmed. He has been correct in his calculations, and it's unfair that he has been given the credit for the problems that we have. But we have some confusion here. We're increasing revenue every year by growth. Sales tax is up. Even if we stay revenue neutral with the tax rate, we're increasing revenue. Maybe not the amount that we want, but we are increasing revenue. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Rainey?
Yes, sir, thank you. I don't want to increase taxes. That's the bottom line. I don't want to, but I also don't want schools falling down around children. And unfortunately, that we're going to go there if we don't do something. I teach at Gallatin High School. Every time it rains, waste baskets and garbage cans and buckets and anything else comes out of the woodwork to catch rainwater. We need a new roof. That's one of the things that's in this capital projects. I'll guarantee you there's other schools around the county that are the same way. For 4 years, I taught on a portable. Every time the wind would get above a certain level, I'd have to take my classroom into the cafeteria and try to teach with 2 or 3 other classes in the cafeteria. That doesn't do much for teaching. It's very difficult to teach in a cafeteria with 3 or 4 or 5 classes all trying to do the same thing. I've got a school in my district that's got, what, 9 portables, Guild. I mean, I've tried to go in and out of Guild. That's one of the polling places in my district. I'm surprised that nobody's been seriously injured or killed around Guild School because it's in such a bad location with traffic and everything. Those are things that have to be done. We've got schools in just about every part of this county that have issues that need to be dealt with. If we don't do something, we're going to have children injured. We're going to have buildings falling in on people. We don't want that. We've got to take care of the schools. Over the last 10 years, the county commissions, 3 county commissions, I guess, have taken money, have taken as much as a cent away from, I think it's 5 cents, away from the schools to put in the general fund. We've taken, as another commissioner said, somewhere in the neighborhood of $22 million or so out of the hospital funds. When the hospital was sold for the second time, I made a proposal that we use that money only in the case of an emergency. I made that motion. That motion failed. It failed because there were commissioners who wanted to use it to fund things that they knew they couldn't get in the budget. And that's not the way government should operate. We've been funding things off budget for years. This will give us the opportunity, as much as I hate it, this is going to give us the opportunity to be able to fund things in the budget and not keep going off budget to fund all these different things. We've had the different county offices in this county have been told over the years to cut back. Some of them haven't had any increases at all except for the increase in salaries that we've had county-wide or to buy new technology or something like that, but they haven't done anything else. We've got to provide services for this county. We've got to provide an education for the students in this county. We've got to provide public safety for the people of this county. We've got to provide roads for the people of this county. And if we don't do something tonight, I don't think we're ever going to do anything. And so as much as it bothers me to have to do this, and I'd love to have it less than 2.5, but it doesn't look like that's going to be possible. So I hope that if people oppose this tax increase or this tax rate, I'd like to see some alternative proposals. I'd like to see how we're going to solve these problems without this. Thank you.
Mr. Graves? I've been sitting here so long, I about forgot what I was going to say, I'll be honest with you. Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to preach on what we don't need, what we do need. There's a lot of needs in the school's budget, in the county general budget, but there's also some wants in there too. Now, I would hate to think that we're blind not to see that. I've been in the private sector. I hadn't had the privilege. I worked at a factory, and I see a smile on the other side, but I see that was a good smile. Wasn't it at the time? I worked in a factory for 22 years. I didn't have that security, and I knew that. I went, they came in, a company bought it from, actually it was sold before then, but the country bought it from Italy. And they told us pretty much what they was going to do. If we didn't take half of our benefits, our wages, and take those cuts, whether we liked it or not. I was part of a union. I know some people don't like unions. They're not all good, not all bad. I've had to struggle. I lost my job in 1997. I sold cars. Fortunately enough, I'd saved my money. I kept some of my money. I live on a farm. I didn't have that security. And now, our health insurance, I'm not blaming anybody for it, but our health insurance, it's crazy. But my constituents in my district, and countywide as far as that, I talk to people all the time. They don't want tax increases. I know we have to, revenue has been, budgets have been raised every year. I may not be what we want, but a lot of needs been taken care of in the 8 years that I've been on this commission. We've built schools, we repaired roofs. We've had commissioners go out to spend their own money. What we make ain't nothing. I'm not here for the money. If I was, I wouldn't be here. But I just want to make a point. I don't want nobody to feel sorry for me, but I want to feel sorry for these situations. My constituents in the district and the county, there's a lot of people struggling. You got health insurance. I got our church, it's got a food bank. I see people lined up out there I never thought would be there. They've lost their jobs just like I have. I don't want nobody to lose their jobs. But there's a time, there's no guarantee. If this 250 was passed tonight, that somebody won't want more money next year. If you could prove that to me, that this would last 4 years without anybody wanting any more money, I'd vote for it. But I can't vote for it tonight for that reason. Thank you.
Mr. Chris Taylor?
Call the question, sir.
Where are we on that? Call for the question. All right, I've got 2 more people in the queue. I'm going to recognize them.
Yes, sir.
Well, and I'll get the county executive too. Mr. Hope, could you hold and let me get the 2 people in the queue?
All night long,
Thank you, sir. And we may be here all night long. Mr. Vaughn, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple things. I want to set the record straight about why I did not vote on the tax rate a while ago. I did not vote on the tax rate because I was provided little or no information before we got to this meeting tonight about what we were going to do on the tax rate. I would sure like to have that in advance so we could have at least researched it some. The other thing is, I keep hearing do the right thing. It's hard to do this work up here. I've been doing this work up here for 8 years. And during that 8 years, we did have to make some hard decisions. Back in 2006, things got a little bit tough around here. But anyway, some of those hard things could do would be not spend more than $15 million more than what you got budgeted for schools a couple of months ago. Another thing is, I heard something on the federal level once a long time ago. It said something about, well, you got to vote on it in order to see what's in it. And now I've been told I need to vote on $95 million tonight so I can see what's in it later on. That just don't make sense to me. And I keep on hearing this thing about Big Macs. Well, 2 Big Macs per person over the Sumner County is about 330,000 Big Macs. Now you divide that into how many McDonald's we got around here. How many people are you going to put out of business so we can fund this 2 Big Macs per person? So I sort of get tired of hearing the Big Macs thing. And I keep on hearing about deficit spending. Well, the finance director was up here just a moment ago, and I asked him point blank, how much money did we spend out of this money that keeps on being thrown out there that we spent over the past few years? And the answer was, if nobody called it, was nothing. Because what happened was, yes, on paper, we went over budget. Please listen to me. On paper, we went over budget. In actual spending, we made it up in growth over the year. So we did not spend money. $23 million out of a $20 million hospital fund is what I just heard a moment ago that we spent over the last few years. I mean, I graduated from Maplewood, but that just don't make sense. Then I hear, well, we got people moving in here from all over the United States to go to our fabulous schools that are falling down. That's not been the case. I've been in this county for 30-something years working in the public sector. I know what goes on in our schools. Then I said on a budget meeting the other day about, well, we're gonna hire teachers. We may not know where we're gonna put them right now, but we're gonna hire them. And then we're gonna hire assistant principals, but that's all ratio-based. Well, let me tell you something. If we went ratio-based for law enforcement in this county, we'd be doubling just about the law enforcement in this county. So ratio-based is good, but you have to put a little bit of, sometimes you have to apply a little bit of, well, it's ratio-based, but I can only spend so much money. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Michelle?
I'd just like to make a quick comment. I take this position very seriously, and anybody that knows me and knows what I've dealt with today would know how serious I take this office. I was elected to serve the constituents of the 4th District, and I'm going to give it 110%. When I ran on the principles of a fresh start, a new voice, a clear vision, and to strive to make our county the most sought-after place to live, to raise a family, to work, and to retire. I didn't run on the principle to make it an okay county. We are better than that, and that was what I ran on, and I believe that. And I want our county to be the most sought-after place for families to come, for people to come and retire, and for people to work. My family and I'm going to go out on a limb and say, are probably going to be the biggest stakeholders of property on this commission. It's not something I take lightly. It's something I've put a lot of thought into, and it's something that I've put a lot of prayer into. And I'm going to do what's right. I'm not going to do what's easy tonight. I'm going to do what I feel is right, no matter how hard it is. It's the choice that I have the most peace about, and that's what I'm going to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Holt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had a cold, so it's hard for me to really speak up tonight. But, you know, I've been around a few years, and, you know, I look at this crowd and I see Mr. Harris, and I'm going to point some people out. I know you're not supposed to do that, but I'm going to do it anyway. I see Mr. Hinton. I see Mr. Hyde. Mr. Harris and Mr. Hinton and I started. We first elected in 1990. At that time, Mr. Hyde was the director of our schools. Over the years, I've made friends. I've lost friends. Some might call them enemies. Sometimes enemies turn back into friends. Sometimes friends turn into enemies again. But one thing I've learned over the years is that sometimes you vote for things. You vote for things because your constituents want them. You vote for things because they're needed. And I was a commissioner up until 2008. I was fortunate enough to be elected to the county executive position. Mr. Hyde spoke earlier that he's the last man standing on the commission that voted for the last tax increase, and he's right. In 2004, we both voted for a tax increase, and it was a 13-vote margin. Like all tax increases, it's very unpopular. One thing is popular, and people deserve it. They deserve good schools, but it's not all about schools. They deserve a community that offers good jobs and has good public service, whether that's public safety, whether that's libraries where people can apply for jobs online now when they don't have the resources, or that's other needed services. Maybe if you live in Hendersonville, water is no importance to you for the upper end of the county. But let me tell you, it's vitally important if you live in the upper end of the county. But all these wonderful things that we've done over the past few years could not have been done without resources. What is needed, what is required, what is a luxury, that's for all of you to decide. But one thing's for sure, you've decided when you passed the general budget, and the old commission passed that, it's out of balance. You, the new commissioners, passed the school budget. It's out of balance. Now you're way out of balance. Way out of balance like you've never been in quite some time. So whether you pass a tax increase now, or you limp through another year, or you pass one next year, or you wait till you grind down to an extreme train wreck and you pass 1, 2 years from now, you're going to have to pass something. Now, Mr. Loring, you shake your head if I'm wrong. Do we need additional revenue? This process has been very, very difficult this year. You know, we've had an assessor of property that says that me and you have tried to somehow alter the appraisal process and bring in no revenue. And he even mailed a flyer out to 20,000 residents trying to explain that. But you know what? He has to take responsibilities for his own actions, just like I do and you do. And I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. But you know what? If the appraisal wasn't what it should have been, that's on him. If we have to step up and vote for a tax increase, that's on us. We need to accept responsibility. One thing's for sure. When we spend the money, we have to pay for it. If you want to get elected, a commissioner that I served with years ago, and I'm not going to name names, Ben, because you'll know who it is anyway. He served 48 years. He told me when I was first elected, he said, if you want to get elected, you vote for everything that's needed in your community. But when it comes down to a tax increase, always vote against it. But you know, isn't that what we're so upset with Washington about today? Isn't that what they do? They spend money that they never can balance their budget with, that they're borrowing, not for capital projects, but to pay the expenses that they're spending money because their constituents say those services are needed. But at least this body has got the integrity. When you do spend the money, whether it's me and Mr. Hyde that voted for that last tax increase, or you that will vote for it in the future in some manner, we always end up balancing our budget. And that's why we're elected. We're elected to do what we need to do to move this county forward. And I can tell you, whether I ever get elected again, if you want a county worth living in, you better invest in it. We have a great opportunity, not just to invest in schools, but to invest in everything that's needed in this county to move this county forward. And one of the most important things we can invest in is economic development. If we choose not to do that, the property tax owners in this county will be crushed under the weight of what it's going to take to fund the needed services in this county. I promise you, we cannot pay for the services with the taxes that the residential property owners will be required to pay. The only way we can fund the needed services, grow our county, and give our citizens the opportunity they deserve, if they are struggling, is to grow our local economy and build our commercial base and retail base. So you have to make a decision. Are you going to step up tonight? Are you going to man up and woman up? Are you going to do what needs to be done to move Sumner County forward? Because that's your choices. Your choices are to fund everything your constituents want, but tell them exactly what they want to hear. Oh, we gave you new water. We increased the classroom size of schools because we're growing. We expanded the airport. We did all these good things, but guess what? We're just like the federal government. It didn't cost you a dime. We're not going to increase your taxes. Now, you know that's not the case. You know that doesn't work. You need to make a decision on what you need to do. We've all talked a lot tonight. I know you want to vote, and I know you want to go home, and I know you're all going to do the right thing in your heart. But think about it. It's so important for us that have just been reelected to do what we know is the right thing and to try to move this county forward and provide the needs to our citizens. Yes, it has to be a balance. But let me tell you one thing. I'm going to give you just one last statistical number. Today, including Sumner, Wilson, Rutherford, Williamson, in Davidson County, we have a population of about 1.2 million people. That's the MPO region. And I did leave out Robertson. I want to throw Robertson in, excluding Cheatham County. The MPO projects conservative numbers, and that's our funding source for all these grants that I'm applying for, that by 2040, in 25 years, because remember this year's over, they estimate our population will be 3 to 3.5 million people. We can either be a positive place where people want to invest money, or we can be the ramshackle community that never invest, and we attract the people with no income and no tax base. It's up to you, and I appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you. All right, 3 speakers, and 20 minutes ago, we had a motion to call for the question from Mr. Chris Taylor, but we did not have a second. In the meantime, I have 3 more people who have gotten into the queue. So at this point, if there's someone that calls for the second, then we will have a vote on whether to do the question. Is there a second? Ms. Lamar, we have a second. So at this point now, we have called for the question, and
all right. Yes. It's going to be on the board. It will require 2/3 vote. It will end debate, and we'll vote on the motion that's on the floor if the question is approved. All right. The original motion or the motion that we're voting on now? The original motion was to increase the tax rate to $2.50. That's the motion that's on the floor.
but that's not what we're voting on. We're voting on whether or not to vote on that motion.
Question. If the question is approved by 2/3 vote, debate will end and we will vote on the motion that's on the floor. Correct. If it passes by 2/3 vote, the rules are suspended, debate is ended.
And I do have 2 people in the queue right now, so just for your information.
All right, we have the motion for question to end debate is on the floor. Each commissioner, please record your vote. 21 votes are entered. 22 votes are entered. Does anyone wish to change your vote? The motion received 17 affirmative votes, receiving the necessary two-thirds vote. Mr. Chairman, debate is ended.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, it's your meeting.
Yeah. Mr. Good, we're about ready to vote on the motion. And if I let you talk, I've got to let everybody else talk, and there were two people ahead of you.
I have the floor as the chair of what we're discussing. I got a question.
Okay.
If it's fine, if there's no objection here, if this is a critical issue, and I don't even know who the two are, but would anybody object to just hearing from those two, and then we go to vote?
We just voted to end.
We just voted to end the debate. Yeah, we just voted to end the debate. All right, so we've called for the question. Now let's vote.
All right, the motion that's on the floor is to increase the tax rate to $2.50. That motion is now on the board. Each commissioner, please record your vote. "21 votes are entered. All 22 votes are entered. Does anyone wish to change your vote? Receiving 15 affirmative votes, the resolution is approved.
Okay. All right, Mr. Good, you still have one item on the agenda.
No, we've got to do the breakdown. David, have you got a proposed breakdown?
It's on page 2.
Okay, can I have a copy of that, please? We technically need to,
We're going to.
okay, we need to adopt that breakdown. Okay, so was that?
So it's been taken care of? As recommended?
That's going to be in the resolution.
That will be in the resolution.
Or do you want to vote on it?
Let's not,
All right,
if we don't-
good, too. Yeah,
Okay,
back to.
all right. Now, Mr. Good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Finally, item number 9, Airport Authority Grant Match, $182,000. This is a 95.5 grant. It is critical that we, the airport has put forth $130,000 we are matching our part at this 182, and I so move.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Good. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Foster. Any discussion? All right, Mr. Vaughn?
Mr. Long, funding source, that changed, I think, tonight as of what happened.
Right now, you can have two funding sources. One would be the unassigned fund balance, or two, since we're going to be looking to issue a bond in short order, if it reaches within the time limits, you can request that to come out of the bond funding if it's issued time. I would recommend, because the revenues were increased to cover it, to go ahead and do it out of the unassigned fund balance then.
Mr. Pomeroy? You're in the queue. You're not?
I got it. Sorry. He never got out.
All right, Mr. Becker, you were in the queue? That was from the last time, okay. Mr. Bill Taylor, Dr. Bill Taylor?
Yes, I'm in the queue.
Yes.
The problem with the airport is the fact that we've grown so much, we've extended the runway, and because we extended the runway, there's a dip in the middle of it that now makes our runway not certifiable for jets to land in that we can land in. If we don't have jets to land in, then because we can't land in because it's not long enough, the insurance won't allow them to land. So we've got to fix the runway. We've got a 95.5 grant, which is a gimme. It's almost a no-brainer to fix it. Then we'll have a runway that we can have any jet can land in it, and we can now grow our airport to be one that's going to be just an envy of any other airport around. The airport has raised has $120,000 to $130,000, and they're asking for us to put in $180,000 difference to make up the difference so that the runway can get completed. In addition, we got to widen one of the taxiways so that the jets with the bigger wings can taxi up and down without issue. It's a TDOT requirement that we have no choice, or our runway will not be certified, and we can't have those jets land there.
Okay. Thanks, sir. Mr. Hinton?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, if you'll allow me just a little tolerance because I'm old.
I understand. I can relate.
I think everybody voted what their conscience dictated or what they believed that the people they represent would like them to vote. I hope that's the case. I hope that's the case, and if it is, we can all live with that. Now, what I'd like to ask is, was the presentation that was made here tonight, how much commitment is in those divisions of the income, or was that just a mock show to make the presentation? We just heard a comment made that because the airport thing, because the body passed what it did, that the airport situation was going to change and be different than what we had here before us, or the money was going to come from somewhere else. We suspected that was going to change now after that last vote. Now, if what we looked at here tonight is representative of what's literally going to take place with this new tax rate, then we've all been appraised of what's going to take place with the new tax rate. If it's not, then we've just kind of bought into a presentation. Do I need to hush?
I can.
No, sir, but you're
I
not.
can.
All right. Okay.
I can answer. I can answer Mr. Hinton's question if that's.
Well, let Mr. Hinton finish. Hold
Yeah,
on. He wasn't finished.
I've never had that much effect before, so
He was
let me go
interrupted,
on.
yeah. Let's see who else you can talk out of the chair.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'd just like somebody to comment on that. Do we have a clear picture of what this tax increase, where it's going to be allocated and where it's going to be spent and where it's going to be used? Or is all this going to be like the spaghetti bowl and all going to be rattled and shook and reallocated again, and we will all get a big surprise where the money really goes?
No. If you take the memorandum and the slide that I had that had the pie chart, and it showed 2 point some odd million county initiatives, almost 7 schools, and a little over 7 to your capital projects. If you take the memorandum and you look at the difference between the two rates and multiply the pennies out, that comes to the exact dollars per fund, and the difference between the 20807. The capital projects, if you look on the slide that have the capital projects, the two first issuance were 70 million and 25 million, which makes a total of 95 million. The projects listed were slightly over 95 million, which I'd mentioned that there was some available resources for qualified projects in your hospital fund that could be utilized, that was a cheaper source of funds. As I was discussing when you were asking for the source of funds, because there was an airport grant match for $1 million, if we go ahead and pay that out unassigned fund balance and you make the intent that it was going to become from a bond and be reimbursed, and it's within the time period, which is 6 months, it could be reimbursed. That's what I was mentioning earlier. So I would recommend, because of the time outlay, that you take it from the unassigned fund balance and you make it in your minutes the intent, if that's the wish, because it was in the project listing, that it's to be reimbursed from a bond issuance if it's issued within 6 months. Which right now the projects are, as discussing with Dr. Phillips, the $70 million worth of school projects are somewhat urgent, because several of them are repairs and constructions and other various things. So at this point, there's a good probability that we will need to issue within the next 6 months. So it's all based upon if you can or not, but these are allocated based on that particular chart, exactly as.
Okay, Mr. Hinton?
I think there's a short answer to that.
Yes.
The money will need to be appropriated. If the school system wants to come in and build Burris Elementary School, they're still going to have to come forward and ask.
Through the process.
Right.
It'll still pass back through the process.
Correct.
Just like everything else does.
You haven't just spent all this money.
Yes, yes.
You just fund it.
Right, there's a couple of things. You'll have to vote with resolution to issue the bonds with your intent of what they're going to be used for. Also, your property tax tonight actually allocated them to the specific funds that have these particular initiatives included into them. When we discussed the funding for the the airport tonight, that's why I mentioned it. If they need the money for the match short order, there's not a bond you can issue that small that quickly. But when you approve these projects, you can temporarily use them from your hospital fund, put in the, like right now in our minutes, that it was your intent for it to be reimbursed from the bond. And if the bond is issued because it would qualify close enough, then you can reimburse it. If not, then the projects were not more than 95 million, and that's parts you can use out of your hospital fund.
And one
All right,
last
Mr.
thing,
Hinton, let Mr. Hinton finish up. He's got the floor. Go ahead, Mr. Hinton.
I move for the question.
All right, move for the question.
point of order,
We had
Mr.
a
Chairman.
second, wait a minute, a second from who? Mr. Guthrie.
Okay,
All right.
And just a point of order, because one of the comments were made were addressed to the comments I made. I don't have a problem with it, but I just want a clarification is, because the budget chairman said in our budget meeting on the airport grant money that it was not funded, and we didn't know where that was coming from without tax change, which is why I made that comment.
Okay, all right. So I think we're ready to vote. Will you withdraw that and we'll vote? You withdraw your motion, you withdraw your second, and we'll go ahead and vote. We won't have to vote on the call for the question.
Yes, I withdraw if you'll vote.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, we are ready to vote on the, the maker and the second. Okay. So we're clear. Who was the second? Mr. Guthrie was the, no, he was second on the call for the question. Who was the second on the? Mr. Foster. Yeah, Mr. Foster was.
So, all right.
That was about 10 minutes ago.
All right, we're ready.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the resolution with the addition is on the board. Each commissioner, please record your vote. $19 votes are entered. 21 votes are entered. They're all 22 votes are entered. Does anyone wish to change your vote? Receiving 21 affirmative votes, resolution is approved on first and final reading.
Okay. Well, before we leave, one thing I want to point out to you is the Sumner County Council of Governments will be meeting in the award dinner Wednesday, November the 12th, 6 o'clock at the City of Goodlettsville Community Center. For you new people, that is that's where we get together with some of the other elected officials. All right, we are adjourned.